Kandi's thumb froze mid-scroll. The chatter of the cafe, the clinking cups, even the music humming overhead, all of it seemed to dissolve into silence. On her phone screen, a shaky, dimly lit video played. There he was, laughing, leaning in close, eyes locked on a girl Kandi had never seen before. The candle between them flickered, painting their faces in an intimate glow. Whoever filmed it had zoomed in just enough to catch the way his hand brushed hers across the table. A caption blazed across the bottom in bold white letters, "Date Night Vibes." Kandi's thumb froze mid-scroll. The chatter of the cafe, the clinking cups, even the music humming overhead, all of it seemed to dissolve into silence. On her phone screen, a shaky, dimly lit video played. There he was, laughing, leaning in close, eyes locked on a girl Kandi had never seen before. The candle between them flickered, painting their faces in an intimate glow. Whoever filmed it had zoomed in just enough to catch the way his hand brushed hers across the table. A caption blazed across the bottom in bold white letters, "Date Night Vibes." She blinked twice, trying to make sure her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. The grainy quality of the footage didn't change the fact that the man in that video was unmistakable. She knew his smile, the way his shoulders tilted when he laughed, the faint scar on his chin from a long-forgotten accident. That was him. No doubt about it. A quick glance at the username of the account that posted it made her pulse quicken. It wasn't some tabloid page or gossip blog, it was a random girl's profile with barely a few hundred followers. Still, the clip had been reposted dozens of times already, picked up by strangers eager to speculate. The comments section was a wildfire of emojis, half-baked theories, and sly accusations. People were tagging their friends, adding their own fuel to the rumor mill, and every refresh seemed to bring a fresh wave of attention. Kandi could almost feel the weight of it pressing against her chest. She told herself to breathe, to keep her expression neutral, to not let her mind race too far ahead, but the quiet panic inside her was already spilling over. She hit replay. Twice. 3 times. Each time, she studied every detail she could find in those 30 seconds of footage. The restaurant looked vaguely familiar. Dim lighting, plush seating, soft amber tones. She thought she might have been there once before for a business dinner. The girl sitting across from him was harder to read. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, partially obscuring her face. She laughed at something, leaning forward, her hand resting casually on the stem of her wine glass. Every movement felt easy, unforced, like they'd known each other a while. Kandi swallowed hard, her thoughts darting in every direction. Who is she? Why haven't I seen her before? Why hasn't he said anything about this dinner? Her phone buzzed with a new notification, snapping her back to reality. It was just a calendar reminder, nothing urgent, but the mundane alert felt jarring against the storm brewing in her head. She quickly locked the screen and slipped the phone into her bag, but the image was burned into her mind. No matter how much she tried to focus on the here and now, the half-finished lie on the table, the faint drizzle tapping against the window, her thoughts kept circling back to that flicker of candlelight, that easy smile, that hand on the table. She told herself there could be a perfectly reasonable explanation. Business dinner. Old friend. Some networking thing. People sat across from each other all the time. It didn't automatically mean there was something going on. And yet, the look in his eyes in that video, the way he leaned in just a little closer than necessary, was enough to twist something deep in her gut. It wasn't just about what she saw, it was about what she felt. And what she felt was a creeping unease, like a thread being pulled from a sweater she'd thought was perfectly intact. Kandi reached for her bag, her fingers brushing against the phone again, tempted to unlock it and replay the video just one more time. She stopped herself. She knew if she kept watching, she'd only spiral further, dissecting every second until she'd convinced herself of a truth that might not even exist. She took a deep breath, telling herself she'd deal with it later. Maybe she'd ask him directly. Or maybe she'd start by asking someone else who might know. The thought of bringing it up to him right now felt too raw, too unsteady. But there was one person she could at least sound out first. Someone who'd tell her if she was overreacting or if she had every right to be suspicious. The rain outside had picked up, streaking the glass with silver ribbons. Kandi watched them blur and race downward, her mind already rehearsing how she'd start the conversation. She needed to be careful, not accusatory, but she also couldn't ignore what she'd seen. It wasn't just curiosity driving her, it was the uneasy throb of not knowing, of being left in the dark when everyone else online seemed to think they had the answers. As she stood to leave, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Riley. "Hey, you home tonight?" Just a simple question, but it was enough to set her next step in motion. If she was going to get clarity, Riley was going to be her starting point. Kandi typed back quickly, "Yeah, I'll be home. But just needed to talk," came the reply. It was vague, but that wasn't unusual for Riley. Still, the timing made Kandi's pulse quicken again. Maybe Riley already knew something. Maybe Riley had seen the video too. Or maybe, her thoughts took a sharper turn, maybe Riley knew the girl in it. The more she thought about it, the more her mind tried to connect threads that might not even belong to the same tapestry. On the drive home, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white through the rain-slick windshield. The hum of the engine and the steady beat of the wipers gave her too much space to think. She remembered other moments like this, times when she'd stumbled across something small, something seemingly insignificant, that later turned out to be the tip of a much bigger truth. Sometimes she'd been wrong. Sometimes she'd been right. Not knowing was always the hardest part. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, engine idling, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The house was dark except for the faint glow of a lamp in the living room window. Riley's car was already there. Kandi drew in a slow breath, shut off the engine, and stepped out into the damp night air. The rain had eased to a fine mist, cool against her skin. She could feel the weight of the phone in her bag, like it was daring her to look at the video again before walking inside. She resisted. When she opened the front door, Riley was curled up on the couch, hoodie pulled tight around her shoulders, a half-empty bowl of popcorn on the coffee table. She looked up with a small smile. "Hey, Mom." "Hey," Kandi said, trying to match the casual tone. She hung her coat, kicked off her shoes, and sat in the armchair across from her daughter. "So, what's up? You said you wanted to talk." Riley shrugged, picking at a piece of popcorn. "Nothing major. Just stuff." Kandi studied her for a moment, noting the slight hesitance in her voice. There was something unspoken there, something Riley wasn't sure how to bring up. For a moment, Kandi considered blurting it out. "I saw a video today. You know anything about it?" But she held back. She wanted to see if Riley would bring it up first. Sometimes the truth came out easier when you gave it room. They talked for a few minutes about school, about a friend of Riley's who was moving away, about weekend plans. All the while, Kandi kept her expression calm, but her mind was a whirlpool. She was waiting for the right opening, a moment where the question wouldn't feel like an ambush. Finally, when there was a pause, she leaned forward slightly. "Hey, did you see anything interesting online today?" Riley looked at her, eyes flicking briefly to the side before she shook her head. "Not really." "Why?" Kandi's instincts flared. That quick glance away, that too casual shrug, Riley knew something. She just wasn't saying it. Kandi smiled faintly, deciding not to push. "Not yet. Just wondering," she said softly. Inside, she was already making her plan for tomorrow. If Riley wasn't going to offer it up, Kandi would have to find her own way in. She didn't like secrets between them. And whatever this was, it was only just beginning to unfold. Kandi didn't sleep well that night. She'd gone to bed with the intention of letting it go for a few hours, but the idea never really loosened its grip on her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that same dim glow of candlelight, that same faint smile, that same subtle brush of his hand across the table. Her dreams kept dragging her back into the restaurant scene, each time adding little twists. Sometimes the girl in the video would turn and reveal a familiar face. Sometimes the man would look up and meet Kandi's eyes like he knew she was watching. Each time, she'd wake up with her heart pounding and a knot of unease lodged somewhere between her chest and her throat. By morning, the gray light filtering through the curtains felt heavy. She lingered in bed longer than usual, phone resting on her nightstand like a loaded weapon she didn't dare touch. Eventually, she pushed herself up and headed to the kitchen. The smell of coffee greeted her before she even reached the bottom of the stairs, which meant Riley was already awake. Riley sat at the counter in her favorite oversized sweatshirt, scrolling on her tablet while absently munching on toast. Her hair was still damp from the shower, and a faint cloud of steam from her mug curled upward toward the ceiling. "Morning," Kandi said, trying for a casual tone as she moved to the coffee maker. "Morning," Riley replied, glancing up briefly before returning to her screen. Kandi poured herself a cup, took a slow sip, and tried to decide how to bring it up. She didn't want to sound accusatory. She didn't want to make it a big thing if it wasn't a big thing. But she also didn't want to waste time dancing around it. "So," she began lightly, leaning against the counter opposite her daughter, "I saw something online last night. Kind of interesting." Riley's eyes flicked up again, slower this time, cautious. "Oh, it was a video. Somebody posted it from that restaurant downtown. You know, the one with the brick walls and all those hanging plants? I think we went there once." Riley nodded vaguely, chewing another bite of toast. "Yeah, I know it." "Well," Kandi continued, keeping her tone conversational, "this video had someone in it that looked familiar." Riley's tablet screen dimmed as she let it fall flat on the counter. "Who?" Kandi set her mug down. "Him." She didn't even have to say the name. There was a brief pause, just long enough for Kandi to notice Riley's hand tightening slightly on the edge of her plate. "Oh," Riley said finally. "Yeah, I know about that." "You do?" "Yeah." Riley's voice was even, almost dismissive. "It's nothing. They're just friends." Kandi let out a small laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just friends?" Riley nodded, reaching for her mug. "Mitchum. I mean, people have dinner together all the time. It doesn't mean anything." Kandi studied her daughter's face. Riley was good at this, at staying calm, at keeping her tone steady, at not giving away more than she wanted to. But there was a slight stiffness in her shoulders, the way she kept her gaze fixed on the middle distance instead of meeting Kandi's eyes for too long. "I'm not saying it has to mean anything," Kandi said carefully. "But it didn't look like nothing." Riley sighed, setting her mug down with a little more force than necessary. "Mom, I promise. It's not what people online are making it out to be. I talked to him about it. It's nothing." Kandi leaned forward slightly, softening her voice. "You talked to him?" "Yeah," Riley said, nodding quickly. "He told me. They're just catching up. He's someone from way back, I think." He didn't go into a lot of detail, but it's nothing sketchy. "Did you know they were going to dinner?" Riley hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering. "Yeah, I mean, sort of. He mentioned it earlier that day." Kandi's chest tightened. She wasn't sure which unsettled her more, the content of the answer, or the slight delay before it came. "And you didn't think to tell me?" she asked softly. Riley's eyes flicked to hers now, a flash of irritation passing through them. "Why would I? It wasn't a big deal. I didn't know it was going to be some viral thing." The room felt heavier for a moment, the sound of the refrigerator humming filling the silence between them. Kandi sipped her coffee, trying to keep her own irritation at bay. "It's not just the video, Riley. The way it looks. You know how people talk. You know how this kind of thing can snowball." Riley gave a little shrug. "People are always gonna talk. Doesn't mean we have to listen." Kandi studied her again. There was something guarded there, something she wasn't saying. She could press harder, demand more details, ask pointed questions, but part of her knew that would only push Riley further into defensive mode. And if there was more to the story, she didn't want Riley to shut down before she got the chance to figure it out. Instead, she took another slow sip, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make Riley shift in her seat. "All right," Kandi said finally. "If you say it's nothing, I'll take your word for it." Riley seemed relieved, a small smile touching her lips as she reached for her tablet again. "Good. Because it really is nothing." But Kandi wasn't convinced. She watched her daughter turn her attention back to the screen, fingers scrolling idly, posture relaxing again. On the surface, it looked like a normal morning. Coffee, casual conversation, harmless gossip. But beneath it, Kandi could feel the ripples of something else. Something Riley wasn't ready to say. She stayed at the counter a while longer, making small talk about weekend plans, music Riley had been listening to lately, a new show they might watch together. On the outside, she kept it light. Inside, her mind was turning over every word Riley had said, every small pause, every flicker of expression that didn't quite match her tone. The rest of the morning passed uneventfully, but the conversation lingered in Kandi's head long after Riley left for her afternoon plans. She replayed it the same way she'd replayed the video, looking for details she might have missed, tiny clues hiding in plain sight. And just like the video, the more she thought about it, the less convinced she was that nothing really meant nothing. Kandi waited until late afternoon to start digging. She told herself she was just curious, but the truth was closer to restless obsession. The conversation with Riley that morning had only sharpened the edges of her unease. Just friends was a nice, simple answer, but it didn't fit cleanly with the images burned into her mind. She wanted facts. Proof. Something that would either put the whole thing to rest or give her reason to push for the truth. She sat at her desk with her laptop open, the screen casting a pale glow over the otherwise quiet room. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the windows streaked and cloudy. She opened her browser and typed the man's name into the search bar, the familiar rhythm of the keys making her pulse steady a little. She started with the obvious, his public social media pages. Most of it was bland, curated content, group photos from events, reposts of articles about his work, the occasional candid shot from a friend's account. Nothing suspicious. It wasn't until she switched to the tagged photos tab that things got interesting. Among the dozens of unremarkable posts, she spotted one from 2 weeks ago, a selfie of the same woman from the video. Her hair was tied back this time, but the smile was unmistakable. The caption read, "Big moves coming soon," followed by a series of hashtags about new ventures, partnerships, and big dreams in motion. Kandi clicked through to the woman's profile. Public. Over 200 posts, most of them artsy shots of coffee cups, cityscapes, and people in stylish outfits. She scrolled back months, scanning captions for names, places, anything that tied her to the man. It took only 5 minutes to find it, a photo from last summer, taken at what looked like a charity event. The man stood in the background, talking to someone else, his face half turned away. The woman hadn't tagged him, but Kandi recognized the cut of his jacket, the tilt of his head. Her curiosity sharpened. She kept scrolling, eyes scanning the images and their captions with the precision of a detective. There were no direct mentions of him, but little breadcrumbs appeared, shots from events he'd also attended, photos from neighborhoods he frequented, comments from mutual acquaintances. She began mapping it out mentally, dates, locations, overlaps. In November, they were both in Atlanta for what appeared to be separate events, except one post from a mutual contact showed them standing in the same crowded lobby, just a few feet apart. In January, both posted about productive meetings within hours of each other, both geotagged in Midtown. Coincidence was possible, but with each overlap, the odds shrank. Her fingers drummed lightly against the desk as she clicked deeper into the network. She opened the profile of one of the woman's friends and found a post from the night of the dinner in the video. It was just a shot of a cocktail glass rim catching the warm glow of candlelight, but the caption read, "When your girl's out having the best night," with a winking emoji. No tags, but the timestamp matched exactly with when the video had been posted. Kandi's pulse kicked. She clicked on the comments, skimming through inside jokes and cryptic responses until one stopped her cold. "Tell him he's a lucky guy." The friend had replied with a smirking emoji and no words. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't proof, not the kind she could hold up and point to, but it was enough to fan the flames of doubt. Then came the photo that tipped her from uneasy curiosity to something closer to certainty. It wasn't staged or polished, just a candid shot of the woman sitting on a park bench, laughing at something outside the frame. The lighting was warm, the kind that came from a late afternoon sun. The angle of the photo suggested it had been taken from close by someone who knew her well enough to catch her mid-laugh. And there, in the reflection of her sunglasses, was a shape Kandi thought she recognized. It wasn't crystal clear, but she would have bet good money it was him. She stared at it for a long time, zooming in until the pixels blurred, then zooming out again. Her mind kept trying to rationalize. Maybe it was just someone with a similar build, maybe the brain was filling in gaps it wanted to see, but the feeling in her chest said otherwise. She grabbed her phone and sent a quick message to an old friend who worked in event planning. Hey, random question, did you know he's been doing a lot of work with a woman named Elise? The reply came within minutes. Yeah, I've seen her around. But Kandi hesitated before typing. Just heard the name and was curious. Another quick reply. They were at that gala last month. It looked pretty cozy if you ask me. That word again. Cozy. It followed her like a shadow. Cozy was what you called a couple on a winter date, not two people hammering out a contract. Cozy implied familiarity, comfort, and just enough intimacy to make the air between them feel warm. And now she had it from someone who had seen them in person. She shut her laptop with more force than she intended, the sound echoing in the quiet room. The pieces were there, scattered like puzzle fragments across her desk and mind. Enough to suspect, but not enough to accuse. She stood, pacing slowly. If she confronted him now, he'd have room to deny everything, to call her paranoid, to twist it into a problem with her trust. If she pushed Riley, she risked closing the one channel that might eventually give her answers. No, she had to play it carefully. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. She cooked dinner without really tasting it, nodded through a TV show she barely watched. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart jumped, half expecting a message from someone who might unknowingly give her more pieces. Later that night, she went to her room but didn't bother turning off the lights. She lay back on the bed with her phone in hand, scrolling through his recent Instagram followers. Elise was there, of course, but so were two other names she recognized from her earlier digging, both part of that startup circle. She clicked one at random and landed on a short video clip, a group of people toasting champagne, the camera panning briefly across smiling faces. He was there. So was Elise. And this time, there was no business talk, no formal event backdrop, just a rooftop patio, string lights swaying in the breeze, and the sound of laughter spilling over the edges of the frame. She replayed it 3 times, watching the way he leaned toward Elise as someone else spoke, the way she smiled at him without looking away for too long. It wasn't damning, but it was something. When she finally set the phone down, she realized her jaw was tight, her shoulders tense. She closed her eyes, telling herself she'd stop for tonight. Tomorrow, she'd decide her next move. But she already knew. Tomorrow, she was going to find a way to see them together in person. Kandi woke earlier than usual, her body moving before her mind had even caught up to the day. The faint gray light filtering through the blinds made her think of unfinished conversations, the kind that linger in the air like smoke. She lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, feeling that now familiar knot in her chest that had begun tightening ever since she'd seen that video. She could have left it alone. She could have taken Riley's casual, just friends, explanation as the neat ending to the story. But neat endings never sat well with her when there were unanswered questions. The morning passed in a haze of movement without focus. She brewed coffee, poured it into a mug she barely tasted from, and scrolled idly through her phone without absorbing anything she read. Every so often, her thoughts would slide back to the same place, the dinner she would arrange, the way she'd watch him as he answered, and the possible truths or lies that would be written in the fine print of his expressions. She thought about tone, about timing, about how to lace her curiosity with enough softness to keep him talking while still being firm enough to demand something real. By mid-morning, she was pacing. She picked up her phone, thumb hovering over his contact, wondering if it was better to wait until afternoon so she didn't seem too eager. But the urge to move forward outweighed the strategy of delay. She tapped the call button and held the phone to her ear. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice carrying that calm, almost unshakable warmth that made people feel seen. "Kandi," he said, a smile tucked into the syllables. "Well, this is a nice surprise." "Thought I'd check in," she said lightly. "Are you free for dinner tonight?" A beat of silence that wasn't quite long enough to be suspicious, but just long enough for her to notice. "Sure," he said. "I know a place. 7. 7's perfect." They hung up after a brief exchange about nothing in particular. The moment the call ended, A thin current of adrenaline started threading its way through her. She had made the move. Now she had to see it through. The rest of the day became a strange kind of waiting game. She busied herself with half-hearted chores, laundry, dishes, email replies, all while rehearsing lines in her head. Each version of the conversation had a different emotional temperature. Sometimes playful, sometimes sharp, sometimes so quiet it was almost dangerous. She imagined the different ways he might react: defensive, dismissive, confessional. The only thing she couldn't quite picture was him being fully open. By 5:30, she was standing in front of her closet. Choosing what to wear felt like preparing for a role. Too dressy and she might give the impression she was trying to impress. Too casual and she risked signaling detachment. She chose a fitted black blouse that caught light just enough to stand out without shouting, paired with dark jeans and gold earrings that brushed her jaw when she turned her head. Effort without desperation, that was the balance she wanted. She arrived at the restaurant just before 7. The city was still wet from a short-lived shower, the streetlights reflecting off the slick pavement in fractured patterns of gold and red. Inside, the restaurant was as she remembered, dimly lit, warm-toned, and buzzing softly with the quiet hum of conversations from other tables. She spotted him in the back, seated with an easy posture, a charcoal blazer framing the lean lines of his shoulders. "Kandi," he said warmly, standing to greet her. His eyes swept over her outfit quickly but appreciatively, a flicker so fast most wouldn't notice. "You look great." "Thanks," she said, taking the seat across from him. They started with small talk as they always did. He recounted a story about a client's over-the-top reaction to a minor scheduling mishap, which made her laugh despite herself. She told him about a mutual friend's birthday party and the unexpected karaoke performance that had stolen the night. He leaned back as he spoke, one arm draped loosely over the back of his chair, projecting comfort, but she noticed how often his eyes drifted slightly to the side between sentences, the way they sometimes did when he was navigating how much to reveal. They ordered appetizers, and the conversation flowed easily enough. But as the plates were cleared away, she felt the shift in the air, that invisible moment when light conversation thins out and makes room for something heavier. She decided to take it. "So," she said, letting her tone fall somewhere between curious and casual, "I saw something online the other day." He arched a brow, sipping from his glass. "Yeah? What was it?" "A video," she said slowly, watching his face. "From that restaurant downtown. You were there. With a woman I don't know." For the briefest moment, something passed over his expression, recognition, not surprise. Then it was gone, replaced by a faint smile. "Oh, that," he said with a soft laugh. "That's Elise. We've been working together on a project." Kandi tilted her head just slightly. It looked like more than a project. His smile didn't waver, but his fingers moved almost imperceptibly closer to his wine glass. "It wasn't. We just wrapped up a big milestone. Thought we'd celebrate." "You didn't think to mention it?" "It didn't seem important," he said with a small shrug. "I have dinner with colleagues all the time." The waiter returned with their entrees, breaking the moment. Kandi thanked him, waited until he left, and leaned forward again. "You know people are talking about that video," she said, keeping her eyes steady on his. "I've seen some of the chatter," he admitted. "People love to make something out of nothing." "Maybe. But people don't usually speculate without a spark." Jumped, half expecting a message from someone who might unknowingly give her more pieces. Later that night, she went to her room but didn't bother turning off the lights. She lay back on the bed with her phone in hand, scrolling through his recent Instagram followers. Elise was there, of course, but so were two other names she recognized from her earlier digging, both part of that startup circle. She clicked one at random and landed on a short video clip, a group of people toasting champagne, the camera panning briefly across smiling faces. He was there. So was Elise. And this time, there was no business talk, no formal event backdrop, just a rooftop patio, string lights swaying in the breeze, and the sound of laughter spilling over the edges of the frame. She replayed it 3 times, watching the way he leaned toward Elise as someone else spoke, the way she smiled at him without looking away for too long. It wasn't damning, but it was something. When she finally set the phone down, she realized her jaw was tight, her shoulders tense. She closed her eyes, telling herself she'd stop for tonight. Tomorrow, she'd decide her next move. But she already knew. Tomorrow, she was going to find a way to see them together in person. Kandi woke earlier than usual, her body moving before her mind had even caught up to the day. The faint gray light filtering through the blinds made her think of unfinished conversations, the kind that linger in the air like smoke. She lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, feeling that now familiar knot in her chest that had begun tightening ever since she'd seen that video. She could have left it alone. She could have taken Riley's casual, just friends, explanation as the neat ending to the story. But neat endings never sat well with her when there were unanswered questions. The morning passed in a haze of movement without focus. She brewed coffee, poured it into a mug she barely tasted from, and scrolled idly through her phone without absorbing anything she read. Every so often, her thoughts would slide back to the same place. The dinner she would arrange, the way she'd watch him as he answered, and the possible truths or lies that would be written in the fine print of his expressions. She thought about tone, about timing, about how to lace her curiosity with enough softness to keep him talking while still being firm enough to demand something real. By mid-morning, she was pacing. She picked up her phone, thumb hovering over his contact, wondering if it was better to wait until afternoon so she didn't seem too eager. But the urge to move forward outweighed the strategy of delay. She tapped the call button and held the phone to her ear. He answered on the third ring, his voice carrying that calm, almost unshakable warmth that made people feel seen. "Kandi," he said, a smile tucked into the syllables. "Well, this is a nice surprise." "Thought I'd check in," she said lightly. "Are you free for dinner tonight?" A beat of silence that wasn't quite long enough to be suspicious, but just long enough for her to notice. "Sure," he said. "I know a place. 7. 7's perfect." They hung up after a brief exchange about nothing in particular. The moment the call ended, a thin current of adrenaline started threading its way through her. She had made the move. Now she had to see it through. The rest of the day became a strange kind of waiting game. She busied herself with half-hearted chores, laundry, dishes, email replies, all while rehearsing lines in her head. Each version of the conversation had a different emotional temperature. Sometimes playful, sometimes sharp, sometimes so quiet it was almost dangerous. She imagined the different ways he might react: defensive, dismissive, confessional. The only thing she couldn't quite picture was him being fully open. By 5:30, she was standing in front of her closet. Choosing what to wear felt like preparing for a role. Too dressy and she might give the impression she was trying to impress. Too casual and she risked signaling detachment. She chose a fitted black blouse that caught light just enough to stand out without shouting, paired with dark jeans and gold earrings that brushed her jaw when she turned her head. Effort without desperation, that was the balance she wanted. She arrived at the restaurant just before 7. The city was still wet from a short-lived shower, the streetlights reflecting off the slick pavement in fractured patterns of gold and red. Inside, the restaurant was as she remembered, dimly lit, warm-toned, and buzzing softly with the quiet hum of conversations from other tables. She spotted him in the back, seated with an easy posture, a charcoal blazer framing the lean lines of his shoulders. "Kandi," he said warmly, standing to greet her. His eyes swept over her outfit quickly but appreciatively, a flicker so fast most wouldn't notice. "You look great." "Thanks," she said, taking the seat across from him. They started with small talk as they always did. He recounted a story about a client's over-the-top reaction to a minor scheduling mishap, which made her laugh despite herself. She told him about a mutual friend's birthday party and the unexpected karaoke performance that had stolen the night. He leaned back as he spoke, one arm draped loosely over the back of his chair, projecting comfort, but she noticed how often his eyes drifted slightly to the side between sentences, the way they sometimes did when he was navigating how much to reveal. They ordered appetizers, and the conversation flowed easily enough. But as the plates were cleared away, she felt the shift in the air, that invisible moment when light conversation thins out and makes room for something heavier. She decided to take it. "So, she said, letting her tone fall somewhere between curious and casual. I saw something online the other day. He arched a brow, sipping from his glass. Yeah? What was it? A video, she said slowly, watching his face. From that restaurant downtown. You were there. With a woman I don't know. For the briefest moment, something passed over his expression. Recognition, not surprise. Then it was gone, replaced by a faint smile. Oh, that, he said with a soft laugh. That's Elise. We've been working together on a project. Kandi tilted her head just slightly. It looked like more than a project. His smile didn't waver, but his fingers moved almost imperceptibly closer to his wine glass. It wasn't. We just wrapped up a big milestone. Thought we'd celebrate. You didn't think to mention it? It didn't seem important, he said with a small shrug. I have dinner with colleagues all the time. The waiter returned with their entrees, breaking the moment. Kandi thanked him, waited until he left, and leaned forward again. You know people are talking about that video, she said, keeping her eyes steady on his. I've seen some of the chatter, he admitted. People love to make something out of nothing. Maybe. But people don't usually speculate without a spark. Kandi lifted a hand in a sort of salute that meant perfect, but she didn't say the word out loud because sometimes praise makes people feel like they've performed for you instead of for themselves. Then she did what she had promised herself to do. She turned back to the wall and wrote in the done column, Media boundary established. Little things counted. They accumulated. They made a shape out of noise. They broke for 15 minutes and ate on crates near the door, watching people move along the sidewalk like river water. A pair of teenagers paused to peer in. Riley got up and opened the door. We're not open yet, she said, but we will be. You want to swing by Saturday and paint a test mural panel? The kids' faces lit up in a way that made Kandi's ribs feel like windows. While Riley took down their names and numbers, Kandi's phone buzzed. The gossip account had posted anyway. There was a carousel, like they'd promised/threatened, but the second image wasn't Riley. It was a cropped frame from the dinner video, the caption spiced with winks and shrugs and raised eyebrows. They had ignored the email. They had ignored reality. They had made a story because stories were currency and accuracy was expensive. Kandi felt the old electricity of rage start up her spine like a storm building behind a hill. She could tweet. She could call. She could drop a text to a friend at a bigger outlet and pour gasoline on their reach with a counter-thread. It would be satisfying, briefly, and it would feed the thing it pretended to starve. She turned the phone face down and went back to the table. There was a gaffer's tape to measure. There were name tags to print. There was a list of paint finishes to decide between, and that, at least, obeyed rules. By late afternoon, the door opened and the room acquired a new temperature. He stepped in carrying 2 small fans and a bag of extension cords, and behind him, unexpected but somehow correct, walked the old event planner friend who'd first texted the word cozy. She had a measuring wheel in one hand and an apology already forming on her mouth. I made it worse, she said as a greeting. I said a thing without knowing the thing and then the thing became a thing. Help me keep it from becoming bigger, Riley said without accusation. The friends smiled with gratitude that had teeth. They measured, plotted a better layout for the orientation day, and found space where there hadn't been space before, a metaphor too on the nose for Kandi to say out loud. Near 6, Kandi's phone chimed again. This time, it was the Accrue Foundation contact who'd texted her the night before. They'd squeezed Riley into a Friday call. Kandi forwarded it and wrote, "You lead. Let me know if you want me on standby." A minute later, Riley replied with a thumbs up and then typed, "I've got it." It was 3 words, but they held a weight that felt good in the hand. Evenings generalize pain. Daylight makes it distinct. Night makes it looser and mythic. So when the sun dipped and the room went from bright ambition to the softer hope of lamps, the door opened once more and the myth tried to walk in, wearing a human face. The blogger. Not a top-tier one with a fact-checker and a lawyer, but the kind with big numbers and no breaks. She stood in the doorway with her phone already out like a third eye. "Hey there," she said to the room at large and to no one in particular. "Big night. Love to get a quote. Or a tour. Or a look at the real story." Riley met her halfway, Not aggressive, not apologetic. Quotes are Thursday at 3, she said, the script ready. Tours begin Saturday. The real story is kids making things. Cute, the blogger said, and the word wasn't neutral. But my audience likes context. They like knowing how we got here. We got here by work, Riley said. And this is a place for it. The blogger pivoted to Kandi like a camera lens snapping to a brighter object. You want to say something on record? Clear up the narrative? Kandi considered the familiar bait, the sugar buzz of a clapback that would be memed by dinner. She thought about her line on the wall, hold and release. She imagined her words sprayed across a screenshot with little circles and arrows drawn by strangers who argue for sport. She imagined Riley's first cohort opening the door to find a story they had not asked for pinned to the window like a bird. No, Kandi said, not unkindly. Not tonight. That's basically a yes, the blogger said with a laugh. Silence always is. It's not, Elise said from the table, voice even, not looking up from the grant checklist. It's just silence. The blogger hovered in the doorway, trying to make the hanging pause into a proscenium arch. When nothing performed for her, she shrugged. Thursday at 3, she echoed as if she'd invented the time herself, and left with the particular breeze that follows exits looking for applause. For the first time that day, Kandi sat down and let her shoulders slump. Riley came over with a plastic cup of water and leaned a hip against the table. You didn't say anything, she said, a light surprise in her tone that wasn't resentment. It sounded like relief trying not to sound like relief. I wanted to, Kandi said. But you were already saying everything that mattered. Riley took a sip, considered that, and nodded. I like this version of us. So do I, Kandi said. They didn't hug. They didn't need the punctuation. Night came properly. They closed up and left the room with the clipboard stacked, tape sitting like a grid of decisions on the floor, a small army of labeled bins ready to be told where to go. At home, Kandi made pasta and ate standing up, then took a call from her sister who asked gentle questions and gave a loud, laughing blessing that had always felt like a shield. She showered, put on the soft t-shirt that had outlived 3 other wardrobes, and sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her lap long enough to make the battery icon anxious. When it buzzed after 11, it wasn't a headline or a demand. It was a video, this one from Riley. 9 seconds. 2 teenagers in the space that afternoon, standing in the rectangle where a mirror might go, practicing how they'd explain their projects to each other. In the background, the corner of Kandi's hair made an accidental cameo as she taped a line straighter than she thought possible. The caption said, "Real story." She watched it 4 times and then again in the morning before her eyes had fully agreed to open. The video did more than the press note. It made the future legible in a way that numbers couldn't. She texted her heart. No words. Then she got up and did the boring important things that keep a day from collapsing. Paid 2 bills, confirmed a delivery window for stools with backs, answered a polite email from a reporter at a reputable paper who asked, "Can we talk about pedagogy?" and made Kandi laugh out loud in her kitchen because yes, finally, please, let's talk about pedagogy. Thursday arrived and with it, the media time. They'd set up 3 stations in the space, one with draft schedules and curriculum outlines, one with budget highlights and a simple chart, one with art supplies laid out like a still life that made you want to put your hands into it. Elise stood at the number station with a half smile that communicated competence without dare. He handled the outreach tree, translating concentric circles into what even the least visual person could understand. Riley took the curriculum station, and Kandi did traffic control, pairing questions with the person who could answer them best and only stepping in when a question had been asked in bad faith disguised as curiosity. There were a few. There always are. The gossip account didn't show. The blogger did, late, wearing a film of annoyance from not being the center of something that did not require one. "Are you going to address the dinner video?" she asked when it was her turn and the room was already thick with evidence of what mattered. "No," Riley said with a small shrug. "We're talking about kids making things." "It's a fair question," the blogger began. "It's not," Elise said without looking at her. "Is there a conflict of interest with your mom and," the blogger redirected, and Kandi smiled because she had practiced this one in the mirror the night before, Not for snappiness but for calm. My role is defined and bound, Kandi said. 1 hour of strategic notes after Riley reviews Elise's edits. I don't make decisions. I don't sign checks. I don't grant interviews on her behalf. I do, however, show up on painting day and lift chairs. You think people will buy that? The blogger said. It's not for sale, Kandi said, and turned to the next person in line, which turned out to be a teacher with a list of 7th graders who had never had a room that didn't mind if they were loud. The story didn't die. Stories don't die. They dilute. They get crowded out by other stories and by work and by time. By the weekend, the studio had a coat of primer and a calendar with 4 names under orientation. A small brand dropped off paint. A grandmother brought cookies and a donated lamp that might catch fire if anyone actually plugged it in. On Sunday, the accrue call happened. Riley sat at the fold-out table with her headphones and her notes, and Kandi sat on the other side of the room pretending to label bins while actually counting her daughter's breaths. When the call ended, Riley wrote on the butcher paper in the done column, accrue, phase 1 conditional, metrics first. She didn't whoop. She didn't cry. She looked like a person who had been handed a key and also a list of rules and liked both. There were still small hurts that surfaced in odd places, like shells after a tide. One night, Kandi scrolled too long and found a thread where strangers psychoanalyzed her face for sport. Another night, Riley snapped at Elise over a spreadsheet line and then apologized too much and then apologized for apologizing. He sent an email with a subject line that read "I missed something," and inside, a thoughtful correction that saved them $300 they didn't have. The blogger posted a video in which she called the studio a tidy rebrand, and then, begrudgingly, a useful one. Each moment tugged at old reflexes, old narratives. Each time, they did the same thing. They wrote a line on the wall, moved a task to done, and started the next small, boring, important thing. A week later, on a Tuesday that felt like 3 days stacked, the door opened at 4, and the first cohort walked in. 2 teenagers and a college freshman who had deferred a semester and an 11-year-old whose mom promised to sit in the corner and be quiet. The room filled with the sound of tape pulling and pencils scratching and honest sighs. A girl named Taya showed Riley a sketchbook with drawings she'd never let her art teacher see because they weren't assignments. A boy named Malik spent 20 minutes refusing to speak, then drew a perfect replica of the fan in the corner and said, "I like lines." The 11-year-old asked Kandi if it was okay to make something ugly on purpose, and Kandi said, "It's mandatory once a month," and the mom laughed into her sleeve. At closing, they took a photo that wasn't for the internet. A habit Kandi wanted to start early, to keep something for the room, for their own remembering. They stood in bad light and didn't arrange themselves by height or smile intensity. They clicked and looked at the result and didn't fix it. It was perfect and wrong in theirs. When the room finally emptied and the air settled, Riley turned to her mother with a face that was both child and architect. "You did good today," she said. "So did you," Kandi replied. "I'm still mad at you a little," Riley admitted, not as an attack, just as an inventory. "I know," Kandi said. "I'm still learning a lot." They stood a while longer without making it a moment, then turned back to the wall. Riley moved one card from "in progress" to "done," and wrote a new one in the first column. "Teach Malik about negative space." Kandi wrote one under it. "Remember to forget about the video." She struck it out immediately. "No," she said, half to herself. "That one's not a task. That one's practice." On the way home, the sky was the kind of blue that lets one star show up early and feel like a cheat code. Kandi drove with the windows cracked and the radio low. Her phone lay quiet in her bag, a dog asleep. At a red light, she thought about how easy it would be someday, tomorrow, next week, next month, to slide back into old habits. Control. Correction. Choreography. She pictured herself rehearsing a press answer in the mirror while a whole room waited for paint. She pictured herself composing a tweet while a kid tried to decide if their idea was ridiculous or brave. She pictured the choice like a fork in a road she would have to take not once but every day. She saw herself choosing. Over and over. At home, she put water on for tea and pulled out the page she'd photocopied from her old notes, the one labeled "Hold and Release." She added 3 new lines beneath it in a pen that didn't smudge. Hold the truth even when it's boring. Release the impulse to perform it. Hold your kid's hand when asked. Release it before she has to ask again. She taped it inside a cupboard with the spices, where only she would see it when reaching for cumin or cinnamon, 2 flavors she'd learned you could ruin a dish with if you measured with your heart instead of a spoon. She slept without dreams that night. The house made its small sounds. The city made its big ones. Somewhere, inevitably, someone posted something that folded the week into a shape that would fit in a stranger's mouth. Somewhere, mercifully, a kid who had never held a brush before woke up thinking about colors in a way that made their chest feel like thunder. In the morning, the studio door opened again. Work wasn't glamorous. It was a cadence. Arrivals. Questions. Ands. Laughter the size of a sigh. A parent dropping off a donation of printer paper with a note that said, "For Malik's lines." A grant officer asking for clarification on a metric and then, without ceremony, approving a small check that would pay for stools with backs. A paint drip that refused to be cleaned and therefore became a design decision. A rumor that ran out of breath before lunch. Toward evening, Kandi stood alone in the room for a minute while the others took a call outside. She looked at the wall of cards, tasks, in progress, done, and felt an improbable gratitude for tape. For paper. For categories that let chaos borrow shape without lying about what it was. Her phone buzzed and she ignored it. She listened to the fans. She thought of the word she'd refused to use the day after the dinner. Not peace. Not yet. But something else. Something like a tide that, having been messy and loud and jealous, now knew the shore it belonged to and would keep returning to if you gave it time. When Riley came back in, she was smiling in a way that didn't ask to be seen. "Friday," she said simply. "A cruise in for phase 1 if we hit the 3 goals." She picked up a pen and wrote on the wall under "Done." Accrue, phase 1, conditional yes. Then she drew a tiny star next to it, small enough that you'd miss it unless you were the kind of person who looked for small things. Kandi looked. She always would. She stepped beside her daughter and watched the ink dry. Outside, the sky did what skies do, shifted without needing anyone's permission. Inside, a room did what rooms only do when people build them, became capable of holding more than it did yesterday. And when Kandi finally reached for her phone, it wasn't to see if the story had changed. It was to take a picture of the wall. Not to post. To keep. A receipt for a day that wasn't glamorous and therefore mattered.